This conference will now be recorded.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Incident Reporting and Grievance Complaint presentation. First off, let me apologize. My allergies are really playing fits with me today, so unfortunately, I may have to cough occasionally. My name is Susan Hayes, and I have been a clinical health facility surveyor for the past 11 years in the long-term care division at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. I also moved into the training aspect of the surveyors back in 2017, 4 years ago. So I've had lots of experience in the fields. I mainly surveyed nursing homes. And so I kind of understand all the frustration and the challenges that the facilities face when it comes to incident reporting and the grievance and complaints. Hopefully the information that I will give you today will help you navigate through those waters whenever you get into your positions. So let's get started. First off, we're going to start talking about incident reports. And the biggest questions that come when we talk about incident reports is, what do I report? When do I report it? And how do I report it? Let's see if we can't get some of those questions answered for you. We're going to be talking about 3 types of incident reporting today. We have the facility incident reports, or otherwise known as FRIs. These are required by CMS and are required to be reported to the state survey agency. We're also going to be talking about state reportable incidents, which are required through your state licensure regulations. These also have to be reported to the survey agency. And then we're going to be talking about internal facility incidents. These are things that happen in your facility that you need to be completing reports on, but these do not have to be reported to the state. So let's start off with our FRIs. As I said, the facility reported incident is required by CMS, and it's known as a FRI. Basically, CMS only requires reporting of abuse, neglect, misappropriation, and injuries of unknown source allegations. There are 2 tags specific to reporting of FRIs. The first one is F608. This says the facility must ensure the reporting of crimes occurring in the facility to law enforcement entities and the state survey agency within 2 hours if serious bodily injury results. This does include reasonable suspicions of a crime against any resident. If there is no serious bodily injury involved, then that crime or the allegation must be reported to the same agencies within 24 hours. And it does note that all sexual abuse will be considered serious bodily injury, as are all reasonable suspicions of the same. The second tag is F609. This says the facilities must ensure the reporting of allegations of abuse, neglect, misappropriation, and injuries of unknown source within 2 hours to law enforcement. So basically, 608 is talking about crimes. If you know it's happened, or if you really believe it has happened, or there's serious suspicions about it, then it needs to be reported within 2 hours if there is serious bodily injury. And 609 is talking about allegations. So if there's allegations of abuse, those need to be reported within 2 hours. So the federal requirements, let's just look at exactly what an injury of unknown source is. So the federal requirements define the injury of unknown source as source of the injury was not observed by any person, or the source of the injury could not be explained by the resident, and the injury is suspicious because of the extent of the injury, or the location of the injury, or the number of injuries at one point in time, or the presence of injuries over time. So basically what this is if an injury has not been witnessed, or the resident's not able to tell you how it happened, anything that could possibly make you think this resident has been abused, needs to be considered an injury of unknown source. Now, we're not talking about those little residents, the little dementia residents that's pushing herself out of her room in her wheelchair, and she bangs her arm on the doorway and creates a skin tear. That can usually, you can pretty much understand how that happened. What we're talking about are those injuries when there are massive amount of bruises to different areas of the body, if there are serious bruisings to the head, if we have fingerprint bruising around the top of the arms, fingerprint bruising around the wrist areas, fingerprint bruising in the breast areas, or if there's bruising in the genitalia area, then those could possibly lead you to believe that there is some sort of abuse going on, and those are the injuries of unknown sources that need to be reported. And basically, that's all that CMS requires to be reported. So let's move into our state reportables. These can be found in Chapter 675 in the Nursing Home Care Act under 7.5.1, reports to state and federal agencies. So let's start off by looking at 612, which is the timeline for reporting. This says, all reports to the department shall be made within 24 hours of the reportable incident unless otherwise noted. There are several areas here where it is otherwise noted, and I will bring those to your attention as we go through. A follow-up report of the incident shall be submitted to the department within 5 business days after the incident, and the final report shall be filed within 10 department business days after the incident. So here's basically anything needs to be reported within 24 hours. If you're going to make a follow-up, it needs to be done within 5 days, and the final has to be reported within 10. L610 talks about reporting abuse, neglect, or misappropriation. This tag pretty much mimics or mirrors the CMS tag. And because CMS is more stringent in their reporting requirements, any facility that is a CMS participating facility will need to follow the CMS requirements, and those require the reporting within 2 hours of serious bodily injury, and the final report has to be done within 5 days. So that is one of the examples of when it is otherwise noted. 608 talks about reporting communicable diseases. And of course, the facility shall report communicable diseases and injuries as specified by the department in OAC 310-515. Most facilities have a document that lists out a whole bunch of diseases that need to be reported to the acute disease department at the health department. And that's what OAC 310-515 is. There's also a couple of injuries in there that need to be reported, some burns, drowning or close to drowning. There's 2 or 3 injuries in there. But this is where you're going to report your COVID-19 infections and your influenza outbreaks. 609 is reporting certain deaths. And basically just says if they didn't die of natural causes, if it was an accident, or if it could be attributed to a medical device, then these deaths need to be reported to the department. 611 talks about reporting missing residents. The facility shall report missing residents to the department after a search at the facility and the facility grounds, and it's determined by the facility that the resident is missing, then a report needs to be filed. This also goes on to say that if you find that the resident is still missing in 2 hours, then you need to notify the local law enforcement agencies to get involved in the investigation and trying to find out where the resident is at. 619 is reporting criminal acts. Excuse me. This once again is pretty much mirrors the CMS. If there is physical harm, then it needs to be reported immediately to the police department or the sheriff's office in the county where the harm occurred. If it's not clear whether the incident should be reported to the local enforcement officers, then you probably ought to consult with local enforcement. It doesn't hurt for you to ask, and they can tell you, yes, it is, no, it's not. They may tell you, okay, we'll take a note of it, but we won't be coming out to make a report. But either way, you'll be able to say that you did notify the law enforcement on the form that is required. 671 relates to reporting certain injuries. This is probably the one that the facilities have the most trouble with when it comes to reporting, because there's so many variables that come into play here. So this says, the facility shall report incidents that result in fractures, injury requiring treatment at a hospital, a physician's diagnosis of closed head injury or concussion, or head injuries that require more than first aid. So let's look at this one just a little bit closer. Anytime you have a fracture, that's going to be reported. So if they get an x-ray in the facility and they diagnose them with the fracture, if they're sent to the hospital and they're diagnosed with the fracture, it's going to be reported. Injuries requiring treatment at a hospital. Just because a resident was transported to the hospital does not mean that needs to be reported. What you're going to need to distinguish here is diagnostic procedures versus treatment. Let's say a little resident fell. They started complaining of shoulder pain. So you send them to the hospital. They do a CAT scan or an x-ray, determine there is no fracture, send them back to the facility. That is not reported because there is no fracture and they received no treatment. All they received was a diagnostic procedure. On the other hand, if that resident went to the facility, was x-rayed, they found a break, they put them in a splint and set them up with an orthopedic surgeon appointment in a couple of days, send them back to the facility, that is reportable. Number one, there's a fracture involved. But number two, they treated with the splint and they are going to get them the orthopedic referral. So the head injury seems to be the biggest issue. Long time ago, I'd say a long time ago, it was actually just 2 or 3 years ago, OSDH redefined what a head injury is. And it seemed to decrease the number of incident reports that were being reported according to head injuries. Unfortunately, those are starting to creep back up again because there may still be some confusion out there about exactly what a head injury is. Just because a resident falls and hits their head does not mean it's reportable. Just because a resident falls, hits their head, and they get a slight laceration and you put a Band-Aid on it does not make it reportable. Just because they fell, they were sent to the emergency room because they had a bump on their head, they ran them through a CAT scan, diagnostic procedure, and they did not have a closed head injury or concussion diagnosis when they returned, doesn't mean it needs to be reported. It doesn't. If that resident was transferred to the facility, transferred to the hospital, had a CAT scan, received a diagnosis of closed head injury or concussion, it is reportable. If they were sent to the ER, they had a laceration that required stitches, they have now been treated, not just diagnostic procedures, but the sutures were actually a treatment that is reported. So always think about, what is their diagnosis? Did they get a diagnosis of closed head injury or concussion? And when they were at the hospital, did they receive only diagnostic procedures, or did they receive treatment more than just a Band-Aid on a laceration? And because you have 24 hours to report this, if you're not sure if that resident's going to be receiving treatment at the hospital following evaluation, there's no reason to just create the form and send it in right now. You do have 24 hours before you actually have to send it in. So especially whenever it comes to head injuries, you need to think about, maybe I'll hang on to this for a few hours and see what happens. You do have 24 hours. Under state reportables, 670, you also have to report utility failures of more than 8 hours. This used to be 4 hours and it was extended to 8 hours a couple of years ago. So anytime you have a utility failure of more than 8 hours, it should be reported. You should report storm damage when it results in relocation of a resident from a currently assigned room. Let's say we have a big windstorm, huge branch comes down off the tree, comes down through the resident's ceiling, they have to be reassigned from that room. That needs to be reported. 673 is reporting fires. They shall report all accidental fires and fires not planned or supervised on the licensed real estate. So if you are planning a supervised burn of the back 40 and it's going to be supervised, fire department knows about it, everything is in play, that does not have to be reported. If the staff are out smoking, throw their cigarette down, lights the grass on fire, that has to be reported. Something that you need to think about here too is smoke fire? Just because there's smoke doesn't mean it needs to be reported. For example, let's throw out popcorn. If you have somebody in the facility that burns their popcorns, really gets it to smoking, I mean they really burnt it, it's smoking, it triggers some smoke detectors possibly. If it didn't actually catch on fire, that's not reportable. There was no fire, there was only smoke. 678 are reports made following local emergency response. And these are in response to natural and man-made disasters. So in these times, the facility can coordinate its communications, status reports, and assistance requests through the local emergency response coordinator, or what we call a LERC. And then they can file the final report with the department within 10 days after conclusion of the emergency response. So how many of you remember seeing the little residents in the Houston flood sitting in their wheelchairs in the commons area in floodwaters up to their chest? This is the type of situation that we're talking about here. Or let's say we have a huge tornado come through, takes out 3/4 of the building. That's another one of these situations we're talking about here. In those situations, your priority should be taking care of your residents. OSDH does not expect you to stop what you're doing, write out an hour report and send it to us. You need to immediately get in touch with your LERC. You need to get those residents to a safe place. And after everything is coordinated through the LERC, and they will be contacting long-term care themselves and saying, hey, just want you to know we're involved in this nursing home that has flooding issues. So we will be aware that something is going on. Once all of that is completed, then you can turn in your emergency response and give us all the details about how you contacted them, who you were in contact with, all the different areas that they helped you, and everything that went on with that. 617 talks about reporting to licensing boards. If you're having incidents or allegations of abuse, neglect, or misappropriation by your licensed personnel, we're talking LPNs, RNs here, or your physicians even, then you need to report to their boards. So for an LPN or an RN, you would report to the Oklahoma Board of Nursing. On 689 talks about reporting nurse aid, non-technical service workers. If you have any incidents or allegations of abuse, neglect, or misappropriation by one of these workers, you're going to need to complete the OSDH form 718, which is the nurse aid abuse, neglect, misappropriation of resident property form. I did send a copy of this, so you should have it in your packet for this presentation so that you can review it. Whenever we get these, and they should be sent in with the initial reporting that you do, then our department sends them on to legal, who then determines whether they will do an investigation or send it on to the Attorney General. So now you know what and when to report. How do you report? Well, you're going to report any fry and any state reportable on the OSDH Form 283. So let me give you a few little interesting facts on the Form 283. And you're going to find out whenever you get into the field and you're actually working, you're just going to start calling this the 283. You're going to say, did we get the 283 filled out? Can I see the 283? So if I say 283, you'll know that I'm talking about the OSDH Form 283. So usually the department receives between 25 and 30,000 of these reports a year. That's a lot of reports. We have a team of 4 to 5. Each single report is read, reviewed, and made sure that everything that we are requiring is there. They also track any initials or follow-ups to make sure that a final is submitted. And that's just a lot of reports. I was totally floored. However, 2020 came along with COVID. And guess what happened with these reports? They skyrocketed. In 2020, OSDH received 45,000, over 45,000 reports. A lot of reports. Now, 20,000 of those, or about 20,000 of those, were strictly COVID related, where the facilities were reporting COVID positive residents, staff members, and any incidents with COVID to the department. But just so you know, you won't be the only one that will be seeing these. And that's why you as an administrator will probably see hundreds of these across your desk every year. So let's just kind of break this down and look at it a little bit closer, see if I can help you understand how it needs to be filled out. So at the top of the form are 4 boxes. It says initial. This is when you're sending in your initial report within that 24 hours or whatever time frame is determined by that regulation. Then you're going to have the combined initial and final. This is where you can, if you're able to combine the initial and final in that 24 hours, you can just submit that and you're all done with it all. An example of that is our little resident that goes to the hospital with the arm pain. She has a fracture. They put her in a splint. She comes back. She's going to see the orthopedic surgeon. You can actually combine that into an initial and a final. Just make sure that you have all of the pieces on the form that you need. The follow-up information, as they said, needs to be done within 5 days. This can be submitted or does not have to be submitted. There's nothing says you have to follow up with information. This can be used at any time between the initial and the final to provide information that you may have forgotten to provide on your initial, to give additional information that you want to make sure that the department has. This can also just be used as a informational tool to the department that I have not finalized this. I am still working on it, and this is where I'm at. And then the final has to be submitted within 10 days, and all of the document will be completed at that point in time. These will be submitted by fax to one of the 2 numbers. I believe the number that they're actually telling us to submit to at the moment is the 1866 number. We've done move, and they're still making some changes to those phone numbers and the fax numbers. So under Part A, you're going to, of course, put your facility information. You're going to put the incident date, the incident location, residence room, common areas, dining room, bathroom, shower room. You're going to identify your residents, your clients who were involved. If you are reporting COVID positive staff, your COVID positive staff will go in this area. And then you're going to look at your incident types and fill out which incident type it was. Right here on the paper, it says, if you've got allegations against nurse aides and non-technical service workers for abuse, be sure and submit the Form 718 with this document. If you look at all of these boxes, you will see that every single one of them align with every single regulatory rule that was put out. There's our certain injuries. There's our utility failure of more than 8 hours. There's our misappropriation, our allegations, our death other than natural causes, our acute disease, our criminal acts, our storm damage, fire, allegations of neglect, injury of unknown source, missing resident, physical harm. And it tells you if there is a criminal act or physical harm, you got to get the law enforcement agency involved. So you better put them down as a notification. So anything that was in those regulations, anything that is reportable is right there. If it's not in there, probably don't need to report it. And then to the box to the right of that is the notifications, and you should check all that apply. Regulations state physician should always be notified anytime there's an incident with a resident. So the physician should probably always be checked. The family, the resident's legal representative, one or both of those should always be checked. It's regulation. You notify the family or their legal representative for incidents. DHS or Adult Protective Services, you will definitely want to contact them if the abuse seems to be stemming from family. They're using their money and they're not paying the bills. Those type of things. They're coming in and they're actually physically abusing the residents in the building. Those. You may also need to report some res-to-res abuse allegations to the DHS. Your local law enforcement, of course, anytime you think there's a crime and abuse is crime, they need to be reported. Definitely want to notify the local law enforcement. Anytime pharmacy is involved, your medications, your narcotics, drug diversions, any of that needs to be reported to the local law enforcement. The appropriate licensing board, if you reported to the OBN, the Oklahoma Board of Nursing, an LPN or an RN, then you need to check that you contacted them. You do not need to send a copy of the report to them. We are going to take your word if you check that you notified the appropriate licensing board. The nurse aid registry, you can check it because you're sending in the 718. Please send it in with us and we will take care of where it goes from there. And the Attorney General, if by some chance you contact them, and this could be the Ombudsman, this could be area-wide aging, anybody that could be involved, a legal representative for an attorney, anybody that you may need to notify. And Part B then is also required at the initial. And you're going to, in the first box, you're going to describe the incident. We want you to include any injuries that were sustained, as well as any measures taken to protect the residents during the investigation. And protecting those residents especially is important when it comes to any type of an abuse allegation. Your very first priority should be how are you going to protect that resident the minute the incident or the allegation comes about. In the second box, you're going to include relevant resident history, and you're going to want to add their cognitive status, fall risk assessment, any relevant care plans, instructions prior to the incident. What this is going to do is let the reviewers who are reviewing these documents understand a little bit of what this resident looked like so that they can possibly determine if the interventions that you were put into place were actually what would have been relevant to this resident. Part C is where you're going to put any of your follow-ups or your final reports, and this is going to include a summary of your investigation. What did you do? Who did you observe? Who did you interview? What were your findings? What do you think caused it? And any corrective measures implemented to prevent reoccurrence. I do want to draw your attention to the very bottom of the screen where it says, failure to document credible protective preventive measures at the time of initial reporting and/or failure to provide evidence of a thorough investigation with corrective measures on the final report may require the OSDH to perform an on-site visit to determine if acceptable measures are being taken to protect residents. If our reviewers look through this and say, well, I don't really see that they did what they were supposed to do. I don't think that they've actually changed anything, and this is probably going to happen to this resident again, then this can actually be turned into a complaint and sent to the teams who will then show up on site to perform a survey. So it is very, very important that you provide any information that you have so that the reviewers understand that you did everything you needed to do for this resident. So let's just talk about this forms very specific to COVID for just a second. So anytime you have a new resident or a staff member test positive, first time, you're going to do an initial. And this is for anybody who tested positive or who could be under investigation. They're symptomatic, but their results are still pending. They haven't come in yet. You're going to do an initial. This is basically the initial for an outbreak. You're going to fill out the initial. You're going to check the communicable disease box. And under this communicable disease box, I just want to bring your attention to it where it says communicable disease. You check that. You're going to call the acute disease services for initial outbreak only. Anytime, any updates are not required for ongoing outbreak. The update they're talking about is to the actual communicable disease department. You do not have to call them from here on out whenever you're still in outbreak testing with any new positives that show up, but you do have to fill out a report form and send it to the OSDH. We do send these on to communicable disease, but it will keep them from having to answer that phone call. So make sure that anytime in that outbreak that you have another positive, until you are 2 weeks out with no positives whatsoever, you will need to send in a report. The very first time you're going to call communicable disease, every time after that, you're just going to send it to us. And I just wanted to put in here a notification of the nurse aide technical service worker abuse, neglect, mistreatment, or misappropriation of property form. This is the form 718 that we talk about. It does say right there at the top of the form, this form should accompany the initial incident report when the nurse aide or non-technical service worker has been named. Fill out this report under allegations at the bottom. You do not have to put anything in there. You can just see the form 283, but you can also put any other information that you may want to really stand out, such as the name CNA was not even in the room whenever that incident took place. So where can you find this OSDH form? Remember, this is required for all Verizon state reportables. So it can be located on go to OSDH website, go to the long-term care, and there will be a tab for long-term care forms. It can be located there, or on that same long-term care page, there is a long-term care COVID-19 resources provider guidance page. It can be located there. Sometimes, just warning, sometimes these documents will not load for you if your software is not up to date. They have had issues. I think they're trying to resolve those as I'm speaking, but there have been times when you have not been able to get the document from these two sites. If that happens, just contact long-term care services at ltc@health.ok.gov, and they will be glad to send you a copy. So, what is not reportable? Now that we know what is, let's talk about what's not. So basically, You saw the little boxes. If it's not described in those categories on the OSDH, it's not reportable probably. Remember, those little boxes were comprehensive of everything that is required by federal and state in the state of Oklahoma. If you happen to come up with your own category because it doesn't fit wherever you think it, there's no place there for it to fit, then it's probably not reportable. And approximately 20% of all the reports submitted, they're either not reportable or they don't contain enough information to identify them as reportable. And when you're in doubt about whether or not something's reportable, be sure and ask. Just call long-term care or email us at the ltc@health.ok.gov with your questions. The incident girls will be very glad to take your questions and to help walk you through exactly what is and what is not reportable. So now that we're through with what actually has to be reported to OSDH, let's talk about your internal incident reports. And these are grievances, and these are some complaints that come in. And the biggest question that, or the biggest problem that we see here is that there's not enough documentation for some incidents. So licensure defines an incident as any accident or unusual occurrence where there is apparent injury, where injuries may have occurred, including but not limited to head injuries, medication, treatment errors, or events subject to the reporting requirements, and shall include all unusual occurrences within the facility or on the premises affecting residents, and incidents within the facility or on the premises affecting visitors or employees. So this is where you're going to be documenting the falls that don't have any head injuries that need to be reported. This is where you're going to be reporting the family member that's coming in and slips on the ice in the front of the building. This is where your medication errors are going to be reported. Any incidents that doesn't have to be reported to the state, even with those that need reporting to the state, should be included in your incidents. And for those that are reported to the state, you can just use that 283 as document that an internal incident was created. These, like I said, do not need to be reported to OSDH unless they meet the submission requirements, which are all of those things we talked about before. And 283 is not required for the internal incident reports. You can create your own form. Some of the software for the electronic medical records that the facilities are using have incident reports in them that can be used. I just caution that if you use those, make sure that they have everything in them that the state requires them to have in them and that your staff are complete in them. Many a time whenever I was looking at the electronic incident reports, it didn't contain what was needed and the staff were really bad about documenting anything in it. And I couldn't tell what had happened half the time, and I sure couldn't tell what had been put in place to prevent the reoccurrence. A lot of facilities will go ahead and use the Form 283 as their internal incident report. And a lot of them find that having that there, you've already got the report started. If something happens, the little resident fell, they had a little bit of hip pain, but they were okay. And tomorrow you hear a snap and they're in excruciating pain. The hip probably had a little bit of a hairline fracture in it. It's now broken. Your state reportable is already started. You just complete it with the information that you get after you've sent them to the ER and you have the diagnosis of the fractured hip. So a lot of facilities do find that using the 283 is how they choose to go, but you can sure use it any way you want to use it, in any form or any type that you want to use. So your tags for the internal incident reports. 621 says each facility shall maintain an incident report and shall have incident report forms available. In other words, you're going to keep a record of every incident, and whatever form you're using should be available for whoever's going to be filling it out, whether it's the charge nurse, whether it's the DON, whether it's the administrator. Form should be available 24 hours a day for someone to complete. 622 tells you exactly what should be in that incident report. We're talking date, location, type of incident, who was notified following the incident, a description of the incident, the relevant resident history, a summary of the investigation, and name of the person completing report. Basically, everything that they say should be in there is what's on the 283, and that's why some facilities choose to use the 283. 623 is your incident report preparation. This says at the time of the incident, the administrator or the person designated to be management in his place shall be notified of the incident, and they shall prepare the report. This doesn't mean that the resident falls today, but the report doesn't get written for 2 days. It means the resident should, when they fall, as soon as that resident is taken care of, that incident report should be completed. It definitely should be completed by the end of the shift when that person leaves, whoever is responsible for it. You will find a lot of times that the administrator has chosen to designate the DON or the charge nurse, whoever happens to be in the facility at that time, to be the authority, and any staff member, your CNAs, anybody should bring any incidents to that person to get the investigation started. A lot of times the administrators, whether they're there or not, will have the staff call them just to inform them that there has been an incident so that they are aware of what's going on in the facility. Same goes for the DON too. 624 talks about incident records on file. It says a copy of each incident report shall be on file in the facility. Whether you're using the 283, whether you're using the electronic record, whether you're using a document of your own, whatever you're using, there should be a copy of that for the surveyors to look at, or for you to go back and look at. If you're using the 283s, or you're incorporating your 283 reportables into your incident reports for the facility, and you can't find it when the surveyors are looking for it, you don't need to be calling OSDH, because that's not a source for the records you can't locate. They will not send you a copy of anything that they find. They might possibly be able to give you a yes, a report was submitted on this date, but if it's not documented in the facility, then it's a deficient practice because you don't have it on file in the facility. 625 talks about incidents and clinical records. The resident's clinical record shall describe the incident and indicate the finding on evaluation of the resident for injury. Now, this does not say you need to keep your incident report in the clinical record. Probably would be wise not to. This just says that all you have to do is, if you write up an incident report, something needs to be in that resident's record describing what happened and if there were any injuries to the resident. So there does need to be a little documentation in the actual clinical record, but the incident report does not have to be filed in the clinical record. And 626 talks about incidents and reviewers. Once again, here's where the administrator's going to see hundreds of these probably cross his desk every year. All the incident reports shall be reviewed by the director of nursing and the administrator, and shall include corrective actions taken where health and safety of the residents are affected. So whether you are creating these reports, you will need to be actually eyeballing them and reviewing them. You might actually find that if you have some repeating incidents coming through, that you might want to get your QA&A involved too, or your QAPI committee involved. I just wanted to also back up on 624. I just wanted to let you know that the surveyors are allowed access to any incident reports in their building. You cannot claim them as work product. So if you are storing your incident reports in the electronic records, then you need to make sure when you give the surveyors access to those records that they have access to get into those incident reports. That seemed to always be a big problem whenever I was on survey, was we had access to everything except that. And then it took them several hours to be able to get us actually access to those incident reports. So make sure that you understand surveyors are allowed to look at your incident reports. Okay, so now we're done with the incident reports. Let's get into the grievances and complaints. This is another area that facilities seem to struggle with. And the big question here is, why didn't they come to us before they went to the state with their complaints? Well, hopefully I can answer some of that for you. So the federal tags in Appendix P, that's for nursing homes, falls under resident rights, grievances, and it reads, the resident has the right to voice grievances to the facility or other agency or entity that hears grievances without discrimination or reprisal and without fear of discrimination or reprisal. That's a very important key. And the facility must make prompt efforts to resolve the grievances the resident may have. Here's probably the answer to that big question, why don't they come to us? Number one, the surveyors, anytime there's a complaint and the complainant has actually released their name, even though it's kept private, the surveyors contact these complainants and discuss the allegations. And there's two things we always hear. And one of them was, well, I didn't want to tell the facility about it because I didn't want mama to get bad care. Or I didn't tell the facility about it because I was afraid they might get mad at me and not take care of me. And the other one was, you know, I talked to the facility about this 2 or 3 times and they didn't ever do anything about it. They just kind of blew me off. That's why right there, you need to make sure that you develop a trusting relationship with these residents. Number one, they have to have no fear. They have to understand that you are open to hearing what they have to say and that you're not going to discriminate or retaliate because they are bringing problems to your attention. And number two, you have to gain their trust by making sure that you attempt to resolve grievances. Now, some grievances cannot be resolved. You just can't give in to anything that they want. And that's understandable. But also at that point in time, if you will just explain to them why that's not possible to do at this point in time, a lot of times that makes a big difference. So right there is your answer to 9 out of 10 problems with your grievances, is they don't trust you and they're scared that somebody may give them bad care if they say something. 585 also says that the facility must make information on how to file a grievance or complaint available to the resident. This is usually done on admission. Usually your grievance and complaint procedures are given to the resident. Also, there are postings throughout the building. And it says the facility must establish a grievance policy to ensure the prompt resolution of all grievances, including maintaining evidence demonstrating the result of all grievances for a period of no less than 3 years from the issuance of the grievance decision. Now, under 585, if you look under their policies, if you look down below, in 585, at this piece about developing the policy, it's written right there. You could pretty much take it word for word from the book and put it over into your policy, exactly what needs to be done. And there's a whole list of things that needs to be in your grievance policy. The one I wanted to really bring to your attention is maintaining evidence. When I talk grievances, we're pretty much talking those little incidents where my black pants are missing, my hairbrush is missing, somebody took my shampoo or my lotion. Those are the type of things, you know, that I look at as a grievance, not necessarily a complaint, even though they are kind of one and the same. But you should have somebody in your facility who that the residents know to go to be able to file a grievance. And most of the time, for little grievances like this, and I'm saying little, but some of them are not little, but for grievances like this, a lot of times it's your activity director or your social services person. That's usually who the facilities have designated for that. The problem is there's no evidence, no documented evidence that these grievances are even being looked at. Let's take an example. Let's talk about the little lady that lost her black pants. She goes to the activities director, social services director, reports her black pants are missing. She sent them to the laundry. She hasn't seen them in a couple of weeks. Okay, so an investigation is started. The facility goes to the laundry, goes through the laundry, no black pants. Okay, so now we're going to go through every resident's closet in the facility, still no black pants. And we decide, since we didn't find them, we'd go out and we'd buy her a pair of black pants. The resident's happy. But whenever the surveyor comes in and starts asking questions, have you ever had anything come up missing? And they say, yeah, I had some black pants. And they told me they looked in the laundry, and they told me they looked here, and they did finally buy me a pair of pants, or they forgot that you bought them a pair and said, but they haven't replaced them yet. I still don't have my black pants. And the surveyor then goes to the grievance official and says, this little resident says that they had informed you they had a pair of black pants missing. She says, oh yeah, we looked through the laundry, went through all the residents' closets, and we just finally went and bought her another pair. And they say, can I see the report on that? Can I see the evidence? There is none. Those are the kind of situations that are very, very important, because it doesn't matter what you tell us. If the resident didn't remember you buying her a pair of pants, you're telling us you did. If you don't have it documented, it wasn't done, and we have an issue. So it's very important that even every tiny little thing that comes in should be written up. It doesn't have to have a great big huge thorough report written up about it, but it needs to at least have what was reported, what you did to try and find it, and how you resolved it one way or the other. And so those are the type of things that you really need to look at, those types of grievances that need some sort of documentation. So then we talk about complaints to the facility, and this is unlicensure 675. This says the facility shall list in its procedures and shall require to be posted in a conspicuous place outside the administrator's office area the following information. And the information is the name, addresses, phone numbers of the designated staff to receive complaints, a notice that a good faith complaint made against the facility shall not result in reprisal, and a notice that any person with the complaint is encouraged to try and resolve it with the facility, but they can submit a complaint to the department without telling the facility about it. So here's where you actually come in and say, here, we want you to know that you can come to us with problems. We're not going to retaliate, and please come to us and see if we can't help you out. But if you don't think we can, then you're more than willing to, you can go on and you don't have to tell us. So this is a piece that starts to develop that relationship with the resident. I want to draw your attention to where it says, in a conspicuous place outside the administrator's office area. So a conspicuous place means easily found. Outside the administrator's office area does not mean posted right beside the administrator's door. These postings should be put away from the administrator's office and basically away from probably even your DON office. They should be put somewhere where the whoever is looking for this information will not feel intimidated by going to look at the information and being fearful that someone's looking over their shoulder and wondering what they're doing or getting ready to give them a hard time because they're actually looking at the information. So think very hard about where you post these documents. 613 talks about complaints to the facility, that they shall make available to every resident or their representative a copy of that procedure. Once again, this is to ensure that they understand it. It's usually given on admission and it's posted, and that they should ensure that all employees comply with this complaint procedure. 616 talks about if a resident or a resident's representative facility employee submits to the administrator or designated complaint staff a written complaint concerning resident abuse, neglect, or misappropriation, the facility shall comply with the Protective Services for Vulnerable Adults Act. And basically what that means is the minute you get an allegation or a complaint regarding abuse, you pull out that abuse protocol and you get into it. You bring it out and you put it into play. The first thing you're going to do is protect that resident. You're going to report the allegation to the health department. You're going to get your investigation started. You're going to look at all of the different areas. You're going to try and figure out what's going on, put your in-services into place, all of those type of things. It just means that if somebody brings you an allegation of abuse, you need to put your abuse protocol into play and take care of business. So complaints to the department. L600 says, and the department of course is OSDH, L600 says, the facility shall post a notice identifying the telephone number and location of the OSDH Central Call Center to which complaints may be submitted in a conspicuous place outside the administrator's office area. Once again, this information now is to file a complaint with the OSDH and has to be outside and away from the administrator's door. Just so you know, any person can submit a complaint to the department, and that can be submitted in writing, by phone, or personally. We have a lot of them now that are coming in through emails, so they're written, writing them in emails. The complainant's identity will be kept confidential unless they direct us otherwise. So this is not information that will be shared with the facility. Even if they direct us otherwise, we still attempt to try and keep them confidential if at all possible. So once these complaints come into the facility, we have a team of, I believe it's 4 people right now that actually review all of the information that comes in. There is a huge algorithm of how they determine what is what goes where, how to triage it. They look at, there's just a whole big process of actually determining the categories of the complaints. They're going to look at whether or not the allegation is even something that could be looked at under regulation. If there's no regulation for the complaint, then we do not have authority to investigate a complaint. So it may actually be thrown out at that point in time, in which time the complainant will be explained why that was not actually taken into as an actual complaint. They're also going to look at the regulatory category that these complaints may fall under. In other words, does this fall under resident rights? Does it fall under quality of care, quality of life, pharmacy? Where exactly does it fall? They're going to look and write out the details of exactly what the complaint is. So as they have reviewed the information, they're determining what the facility failed to do. And On the report, the intake information report they give to the surveyors, there's actually a failed to statement that says the facility failed to turn and repossession the resident to prevent pressure ulcers. So we know exactly what we're looking for whenever we go into the facility. And we do attempt to keep blinders on. We're not in the facility on a complaint to try and work a big complaint. We really want to try and focus on exactly what that allegation is. That doesn't mean that as we're looking at that allegation that new pieces don't open up that played into that allegation, but we're not in there to do a full type survey. We are strictly there to look at exactly what was on that allegation. They're also going to give us all the supporting evidence. What did they say? What was reported? And how did that, here's the evidence of why we put that failed to statement on that report. And then they're going to triage and provide a due date. So when we triage, there's 4 categories. The top category is IJ, or an immediate jeopardy. I'm sure maybe you've heard the words immediate jeopardy by now. That's something that everybody dreads to hear and gets very frustrating and scary whenever those words are thrown around. But that is an IJ, or an immediate jeopardy, is the top category. An on-site survey must be initiated within 2 business days of receipt of this information. So once that information comes in, if it comes in on a Wednesday, the surveyors have to be on site in the building within 2 days. So they have to be on site by Friday. This is very serious. IJ is defined as a situation in which the provider's non-compliance with one or more requirements of participation has caused or is likely to cause serious injury, serious harm, serious impairment, or death to a resident. This is extremely serious and immediate needs to be looked into to make sure that residents are truly being protected. So this is the top immediate jeopardy. Within 2 days, we will be in the building. The next category is a non-IJ high. So it's not quite reached that IJ level, but it's still pretty serious. The survey teams will be on site, will be in that facility within 10 business days of the prioritization of that. So whenever they get it prioritized 10 days, we're going to be in the building. The non-IJ medium, there really is no time frame specified, but an on-site survey has to be scheduled. The OSDH goal is to do these surveys within 30 days. However, that didn't necessarily happen in 2020, and it may not happen in the next few months now that surveys are starting to get back up and under control. But we do attempt, this is our goal, this is what we strive for, but we will be scheduling these whenever the time allows. And then we have a non-IJ low. These have to be investigated during the next on-site survey, which means it could be a whole year that these are held on to. If you walked out of the recertification, you don't have, and you're past the follow-up and you don't get another complaint until the next recertification, it can be investigated at that time, unless the agency has time, and then they can go ahead and do an on-site. But these can actually be coming in with any other investigation that comes in. And an example of a non-IJ low in nursing homes, in my 11 years, I've probably seen 3. That they're very, very, very rare. And the one that I worked was, this facility had an enclosed patio area that had grass in it, and in order to get in to mow the grass, you had to push the lawnmower from an outside door straight across the hall out into the patio area, mow the yard, and then take it straight back across the hall. And there was a complaint filed that the lawnmower was being pushed through the hall. And so that was a low. As long as that lawnmower wasn't on, there was no problems there. So complaints to the department, like I said, the complaints can be investigated on an abbreviated or complaint-only survey, on a recertification, or a follow-up. Basically, anytime a surveyor walks in the door, they could have a complaint in hand, and they will let you know on your entrance conference that they do have a complaint. They will tell you what regulatory area or category it's in. In other words, all they're going to tell you is it's a resident right tag or it's a quality of life tag. They will give you no specifics. They will give you no residents names, nothing. Just this is the area that we're going to be looking at. These surveys can be conducted during off hours or on weekends. We also do recertifications. We have a certain percentage that we have to do off hours, but these are the ones that a lot of times you'll see whenever, if we get a complaint that 3 o'clock every Saturday night, the staff are all asleep in the building, then you can expect the surveyors to show up at 3 o'clock on a Saturday night, because we want to get in and see exactly what is going on in the facility in real time to see if that's really truly what's going on, and go from there. So they can be done after hours, they can be done on weekends. These surveys can be done at any time that needs to be done. After the investigation is complete, they have determined whether there is deficient practice or not, the facility and the complainant will receive a 2567, and the 2567 will state there were no deficiencies determined, or it will give you the details of the deficiency. They will also receive an investigative report. The investigative report is very general in nature. It tells you how many people were interviewed, how many observations were done, what kind of records were reviewed. If it was not substantiated, if the allegation was not substantiated, it will give you a general idea of why it was not substantiated. But if it was substantiated, it's just going to say, see the 2567 for details. So I think we're done now with grievances and complaints. And I just want to kind of leave you with a couple of final thoughts. If you take away nothing else from this presentation today, I would like for you to take away on your incident reports that you need to know what is reportable and what is not. It's all spelled out in the appendix double P, or whatever appendix is used in your facility type, appendix Z, appendix J. It's all spelled out there, and it's also all spelled out in Chapter 675 of the Nursing Home Care Act. So if you need to know, it's word for word in those documents. And then you also need to watch your timelines to report. Pretty much everything is 24 hours, 5 days, 10 days, with those exceptions, and you need to know what those exceptions are, because deficient practice can be written if things are not reported in the correct timeline. And when it comes to complaints, the biggest thing I would want you to take away is to get out there, get out from behind your desk, get out on the floor, talk with those residents, make them feel like they're important to you, listen to them, develop a relationship with them so that they feel safe enough to come to you with any complaints, and that they trust that you're going to take care of those complaints or grievances for them. And that will keep them from coming to us. And then I also want you to remember that you need to be able to post those procedures for your facility and the department submissions of grievances and complaints, and maintain grievance and complaints records. If you take nothing else away from any of this, those are the things that I would like for you to take away. Well, we've kind of come to the end of the day. I hope that I've answered some of those questions that are there. Of course, everything becomes real world whenever you get out there in the real world. If I've presented any information today that you have questions about, please feel free to contact long-term care at health.ok.gov. That email is monitored 24 hours a day, and whenever it comes in, they triage to where it needs to go. They can either send it to me, they may send it to the complaints department or the incident intakes girls, and then we can get answers back to you. So please contact us if you have any questions about anything. Once again, thank you. Thank you for taking on the job that you're fixing to take on. These little residents need people who care about them. And just know that we at OSDH have the same goal that you do. Our goal is that they get the best care that they can, and your goal is that they get the best care that they can. We are not your enemy. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime that you need guidance. And so for that, I would like to say thank you, and please stay safe.